So hello and welcome to Engaging Volunteers, which is the third training session offered by the Community Tree Nursery Collaborative, or CTNC for short. Lovely to see you all. I'm Hilary and I'm the events coordinator for CTNC. So for those of you who are new to the collaborative, I'll just briefly introduce it for you. The CTNC is a peer-to-peer learning network that aims to enable community tree nurseries in the UK to share good practice and discuss common issues. The CTNC has been formed by Fellowship of the Trees in association with 4 well-established community tree nurseries, who are Coeden Fac in Swansea, More Trees in Dartmoor, Special Branch in Brighton, and the Tree Musketeers in Hackney. And the overall vision of the CTNC really is to inspire and nurture the successful growth of hundreds of community tree nurseries across the UK, bringing people together to cultivate locally sourced trees, to increase tree cover for both ecological and community well-being. So on to tonight's talk. I'm really pleased to introduce you to 2 different speakers. Our first speaker is Molly Sweeney, who is the Volunteer Development Coordinator for Groundwork London in Waltham Forest, and she provides support to organisations regarding recruitment and involvement with volunteers. And she is really passionate about how volunteering can help people develop and overcome their own challenges. She loves getting out into nature and wants to learn more about trees. Welcome, Molly. I'll hand over to you. And I'd just like to say, actually, before you start, Molly, if people have questions, please do add them to the chat. If you're on Facebook Live, please put them in the comments and we will get through to the questions after both the speakers have finished. So thank you. Over to you, Molly.
Thank you so much, and thanks so much everyone for coming. So I've got a presentation because I'm not interesting enough just to talk. So I will share my presentation and I will get started now. So yeah, my name is Molly Sweeney and I work for a charity called Groundwork London, who are an environment and community charity. And my job is basically to help all sorts of organisations, from very big organisations to really small organisations to informal groups, with anything to do with how best to organise, manage, recruit, support volunteers. And today I'm talking about diversity and inclusion in volunteering. What do we mean by diversity and inclusion? So it's one of those phrases that, especially if, like me, you work in the charity sector, you're very used to hearing. And we often think about kind of it in sort of a very kind of legalistic way. So there is the Equality Act, and you can see all the different hands are one of the different elements than what are called 9 protected characteristics under the Equality Act from 2010. And the Equality Act says that you will be protected from discrimination under these different items. So that's race, marriage and civil partnership, disability, religion or belief, sexual orientation, sex, gender reassignment, age, maternity and pregnancy. Volunteering is not covered in the same way as employment by the Equality Act. So there isn't the same kind of like professional strict rules approach. It's more about thinking about values and why you do what you do and why you want to include people. And whenever you think about diversity and inclusion, it's very easy to think about yourself as an open and friendly person. And one of the things that I found a challenge when thinking about diversity and inclusion is it's not just about being, yourself who's an open and friendly person. It's actually often means that you have to challenge yourself and other people who you work or volunteer with to be more diverse and inclusive. And that's something I'm sort of going to talk about today, and hopefully leave people with just a few thoughts on where to go next. So it's always useful to think about the benefits of volunteering for individuals. Why do people volunteer? So I work at a volunteer centre in Waltham Forest as part of Groundwork London, and a big reason that people come to us is because they want to get a job. They want to be able to say that they have different skills. They want to be able to say that they, can prove themselves, maybe get a reference. People also want to develop personal connections, especially after the last period of time, in COVID times, obviously, maybe because they've moved to a new area, maybe because they're a recent arrival, they're a refugee, they're asylum seeker. Asylum seekers cannot work, so volunteering is a really great kind of outlet for all of those impulses. Improving fitness and physical health, which is obviously a big part of tree planting. It's good for your physical health. Improving your mental health. Specifically talking about environmental volunteering, combating climate anxiety, which is a growing concern, and also a sense of purpose. So obviously, when we're thinking about people who are affected by those 9 characteristics, who are sort of on the other side of prejudice or discrimination, having those kind of benefits will obviously mean a lot more. If you're someone who is in overcrowded housing, if you're someone who has been rejected for jobs because of your disability, if you're someone who is worried about coming out at work, the benefits of work experience will help you. If you're someone who is lonely because you are of a different religion to a lot of the other people around you, the personal connections will be really beneficial, and so on. And then I suppose thinking about it from the point of view of the organisation or group, or as a tree planting group, why should you put inclusion and diversity at the heart of your volunteering programme? So obviously different perspectives on things, different ideas, new concepts. Your reputation. This is maybe a big thing that people kind of, maybe it seems like a slightly icky thing to think about or think about it in those terms, but it is a big part. I think people are much more aware of inclusion and diversity now. And especially if you have kind of a job in the charity sector, that's something that you're always thinking about, and how it looks does help. So that is maybe if there's someone in your group who isn't as convinced, that is kind of one of the benefits. And also justice and fairness and being open to people and letting everyone have an opportunity. New friends and a new source of volunteers. And very often inclusive and diverse kind of policies are better for everyone. So for example, subtitles on films are good for people who are deaf or hearing impaired, but also they're very good for teaching children to read, actually. That's a fun fact for you there. If, for example, you had someone who wanted to volunteer for you who had autism and they required really clear communication, and like a sort of very clear timetable, that might be beneficial for everyone, even if it wasn't a reasonable adjustment. So it's always good to think about how volunteering can help all sorts of different people. Another example I know of was a historic ship. That was a charity, ran the historic ship, and a lot of the people were very not particularly pleased that the fabric of the ship would be kind of changed because they were putting in a lift. They didn't think it was necessary. Obviously, they were like, obviously, we care about disability inclusion, but we're not sure if it's worth it. Until another one of their fellow volunteers started using a wheelchair. And then suddenly, of course, the sort of lift is absolutely necessary and completely fine. And that is something that sometimes diversity and inclusion can seem like something quite distant until it's somebody who is part of your new group of friends or your new fellow volunteer, and then suddenly it seems a lot more important. And obviously in terms of the climate emergency, which is tree planting volunteers, you're at a key part of tackling, that's an important thing to be aware of, that the climate emergency will impact some groups more than others. Obviously, globally, it is impacting other groups more than others. And then in terms of things like disability, age, class, where you live, which is tied up to, historically racist housing policies, your experience of being able to live where you choose to, where you want to live, but maybe, you don't feel as comfortable in certain communities because of your gender identity or your sexual orientation. So those kind of things are all interconnected. And that's why I think there's an increasing awareness that when we're talking about the climate emergency, we also have to be talking about diversity and inclusion. Yes, sorry. I just saw the message about moving to be the center of the camera. Hopefully I have done that right. Great. And this is an article about climate change and thinking specifically about race. So one of the 9 protected characteristics. And I can put this link in the chat because I thought it was a really interesting article. But and I'll move on a little bit because I have talked too much already. But obviously, it's talking about the fact that some countries such as us have historically and now had a much bigger impact, a carbon footprint compared to other countries, but those countries will be impacted. The most affected places and people, so in this example of Zambia, will be affected first. So obviously I've talked a lot about why diversity and inclusion is really important in volunteering, but what are their challenges? So unconscious bias, maybe, for example, you posted in your local roads WhatsApp group about your volunteering, but not in the road, the road down the street, because you sort of haven't really thought about it and you've sort of unconsciously assumed they wouldn't be interested in volunteering. Conscious bias and prejudice. It's always, when you're talking about diversity and inclusion, I think important to acknowledge that some people hold biased views consciously and proudly. And those are some people, including in kind of the environmental movement or in charities or in community groups. Obviously, different demographics that, some areas of the country are more likely, less likely to have people of colour or of the global majority, so Black, Asian and minority ethnic people. They may be more likely to have older people or more likely to have younger people, more or less likely to have people who are disabled. Inaccessible environments. Obviously, sometimes if, for example, someone's a wheelchair user, certain places are harder to get to. They also might be harder to get to if you don't drive, if you can't afford the petrol, or you can't afford public transport. And then I put 2 kind of contradicting examples or challenges, one of which is informal ways of recruiting and managing volunteers. And the other example is formal ways of recruiting and managing volunteers. And I can sense people saying, what does this woman want from us? I suppose there's something about cool, sometimes really informal groups have something like call Jim if you want to take part. Text Marie, here's her number. And if you're someone who doesn't like using the phone, maybe because you have an anxiety disorder or you're not very confident in your English on the phone, maybe that doesn't quite work for you, or you don't want to get into a big conversation before you know all of the kind of facts and how much it's going to cost, and you can't make a decision based on that. So something that's super kind of informal and, just come along and, we'll be in the pub so you can come and have a chat with us, might be off-putting for some people who would feel more confident if there was more information up front, if there was like a clear list of all the different things and how much things might cost, for example, about traveling there, and different ways of getting in touch. So maybe it's a phone call or a text or an email or whatever works for the group. And then obviously an overly formal process, a complicated website would not be helpful to someone who wasn't as confident using IT. Having to write a kind of explanation of why you're interested might not be good for someone whose English wasn't very strong, who wasn't a very confident writer. So that's the kind of thing of always thinking about your process. Obviously, time and money. From the point of view of the organisation, you may not have the time to really think about the kind of inclusion and diversity process, or you may not be able to afford certain things. From the point of view of the volunteer, they may not have time to volunteer, and that might be harder due to kind of the prejudice and discrimination they face in society. They may not have money to, get the bus to volunteer, which is where things like expenses, if you're able to pay them, are really beneficial. Lack of expertise around areas related to diversity and inclusion, and a lack of confidence. You don't want to say the wrong thing or get confused or offend someone. And obviously those are really great impulses, but sometimes they can hold you back from making change. So I thought I'd sort of run through really quickly why diversity and inclusion is important, and also the kind of challenges and the reasons why maybe people feel less able to engage with those things. So firstly, in terms of where to start, I would say contact your local volunteer centre. I'll put a link in the chat later about how to find that person, your volunteer centre. It should be their job to support you to have a diverse and inclusive volunteering programme. They can give you lots of advice. They'll help you connect up with groups. So connect with different people. Is there a local mosque? Is there a local disabled group? Are there kind of older and younger people? Are there sort of organisations like Muslim hikers, for example, who kind of organise group trips for Muslim people who maybe wouldn't feel as comfortable in the countryside because of prejudice and a kind of sense that it's not maybe for them, that some people feel like. So that's a really great way of doing things. And also reflecting on your processes. So maybe mapping out how volunteers get involved. Oh, they see a post on a Facebook group. What do they do next? If I was someone who didn't feel very confident with my English level, what could I do? If I was someone who had never ever got involved in any kind of environmental volunteering before, how might I feel? Do we talk a lot about how we all go to the pub afterwards, and how might that be slightly off-putting for some people? It's also important that you feel confident to tackle prejudice and discrimination. I think all groups, no matter how informal, should have like an agreed sense of a code of conduct, an idea of the best ways of how to approach each other. And it can be something that feels very informal, but basically, while we're here, we treat each other with respect. We don't kind of not include someone, and we try and be open to all comers. And also listening and reflecting. So you've come along today to listen and reflect to me and the other speaker, and sort of seek out stories of other people who, from a range of different backgrounds, who get involved in the environmental movement and in environmental volunteering. And I think that's the key thing. It's always great to listen, and it's always great to reflect. Thank you very much for listening. And I'm really excited to hear the next speaker, so thank you.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful, Molly. Thank you so much. There's a lot to think about there. And just to let those who have joined us during Molly's talk, this is being recorded. So if you've missed anything, or you want to go back and look at those slides again to sort of contemplate them a bit more, obviously it will be available on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, and also on the CTNC part of the Fellowship of the Trees website. Thank you so much. So I'd now like to introduce Cabo Yukwa, who's inclusivity and environment advocate for St Werburghs City Farm in Bristol. And he's been living in the UK for about 8 years, and he describes himself as an artivist storyteller, ceremonial drummer, writer, investigative journalist, events organizer and cultural ambassador, and so much more. Welcome, Kabbo Yukwa.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Molly, for that wonderful sharing. So my name is Cabo Yukwa. I am from Tutquap, which is South Africa. And as Hilary has pointed out, I've been an advocate in my role as a cultural cohesion consultant with St Werburghs City Farm for the last couple of months, working on their desire and intention and helping align their process of wanting to diversify and allow people from different cultural, economic, and religious and class backgrounds to have access to interact and engage with St Werburghs City Farm, which is based in St Werburghs. So I'll share some of my elements of my experience with them and the challenges it will be a continual process. One of the key things that I always try to share with them is that I admire their desire and intention and their courage, because it takes courage to attempt to transform a culture that's been set for 10, 20 years of functioning in a certain way, where no one was particularly to blame other than the economic, political, and cultural climates changing and impacting people's ability to have access to resources, or in the cases of housing, to be able to afford to live in certain areas in Bristol as it goes through its different forms of transformation and experience of gentrification. But before I get into that, I wanted to read a poem, if that's okay with everyone. And basically it is with one of the organizations that I have, that I'm aligned with as a cultural ambassador and cohesion consultant. And this was an interview that was done with a Somali mother who was sharing her experience in relation to having access to nature, if I can use that, if you can indulge me to use that term in that way, who has moved to Bristol recently. And I was commissioned to listen to the speech and turn it into a poem. So I'll read that and then I'll continue sharing the different experiences I've had. So the poem is called Be at Ease, Plant a Tree. Be at ease, plant a tree. Get involved. Don't ask, just plant. Edible would be nice. Back in the day, gardens were a luxury. Soon it might become an absolute necessity. Starting a new tradition might be our only hope. Back home in Somalia, the sun, the soil, the climate. Mum says things would grow in a month. Then the war came, forced us out. Across the seas we struggled till a refuge was found. Holland caught and held us. The village then a beacon of green, yet now Bristol's home. The buildings at first so grey, took a while to get used to it. Now it's home. Grown on me and my children, I owe them the experience of their culture, their roots, starting with my headscarf and food. For what I feed them, their diets, is not only made up from what they consume. It's in my name, Sudi, narrator of Hadith, in belonging, in knowing, in growing, what we share, even if my choice of clothing on earth stays, fueled by ignorance, I got to trust. Even when judged in nature and take our children out. Run free, just breathe. Like me, lay down on the ground, loving the breeze of the trees on my face. Nature, I appreciate. Dove Gardens is now our safe space, for being cooped up in a flat is no good for spiritual growth. Yet what could we do? Lockdown had us seeking, reaching out to be amongst the yellows, the browns, and the greens. Now we're greening up our community, tilling the soil and planting trees. Keep it alive. Farm those skills, make a difference, pay attention. We can be the change that's needed. The good feelings nature evokes is a blessing I want to bestow on my little ones and share it all around. Spread it like a blooming wildflower. The smells, sights, the birds that now come to sing stirs up childhood nostalgia I hope to recreate for myself. For our children needs us to create beauty in our world. What better way then to show them how to tend, nourish, and nurture the nature within? So part of my experience and part of my purpose is in Bristol, I want to get involved in as many cultural movements that allows and encourages people to be in nature whilst connecting that actually, if we connect to nature, we're connecting ourselves because we are nature. And what St. Werburghs City Farm is doing, they've initially when the farm was established, it was established by a multicultural collective of people of all hues, of people of different cultural backgrounds, that was living in Bristol, who came to that environment through different reasons, like the Windrush generation, people who moved out from farming towns, or from mining towns, from farming towns as well. So it was quite an eclectic establishment when the farm was established. And then with the economic climate and as I've indicated earlier, and the different political and economic changes and gentrification having a real impact on Bristol, it started becoming less diverse, and the area around the farm started becoming more white middle class, or I should say Caucasian middle class families, and the interaction that people that had access to the land was more focused around that collectives of people. This was nobody's fault or direct intention to create this environment. Yet it's like this the thing I was trying to share with them. It's nobody's fault, but we can still take a responsibility and to transform and just to create a sense of more belonging, of more interaction of different cultures. So we've gone through different processes of looking at the established norm on the farm in this moment in time, looking at the different processes from the constitution that they follow, from their mission statements, from their visions, from the actual employment of staffing, from the people who have access and who regularly interacts with the land and the farm in different ways, whether it's through who is in the cafe that's on the farm, who has autonomy or who has access or who has been using that, continually looking at the people who has booked the spaces out that is available to the community, the different organizations, how representative. So we really have gone, and it's a continual process, we've really gone in and looked at the whole makeup of what makes in Werburghs Farm what it is at the moment. And we explored the reasons on why do people, no one on the farm directly or deliberately would exclude anyone from having access. They actually want more people to have access to the land. But there is certain cultural and social dynamics where that is more inviting, familiar and comfortable for certain groups of people, whereas it's not for others. And these have been some of the processes that we've been exploring, and how would we be able to encourage people from multicultural environments and backgrounds to come to the farm. So some of the basic things we've asked asked and suggested, and they have taken on board is for instance, when you use signing at the farm, that it's not only in English, because if you want people from multicultures to access, they might feel alienated if they can't read per se English that well, and they don't understand what is written on the different directions or the different indicators of the story. So one of the things we suggested is that we find a way to welcome people in the different languages that is found in Bristol. And when we went deeper into that, we realized, okay, there is actually 92 recognized languages. So it's also not as simple as that. And then we asked, so how many people on the land actually has access to the plots? Who's working the land? And what does the waiting list look like? And then we ask questions like, so if you're saying you want to change the access, how are we going to approach and speak to the people and ask them, okay, here's 50 plots of land. 45 is accessed and used by one collective of group of people? How do we remain humane and kind in sharing their desire? And do we do it this term? Do we give it a year? Do we give it 3 years? Do we give it 5 years? So looking at ways, how can we be effective, knowing that no matter what the approach is, that somebody is always going to be unhappy. If you're looking to make fundamental cultural and operational changes from one particular model to something that is more diverse in this case, or radical, if I can use that term very gently, then you're going to have to be prepared to have the courage to have difficult conversations. And before we can initiate or constitute or accept any of the recommendations, you have to start the conversations with the people that's going to be affected. So if someone's been on a waiting list for 5 years and they are particularly part of one collective that is on the land, and you want to tell them after waiting for 5 years, sorry, mate, we need to, how do you breach that conversation? How do you, without losing your humanity and without diminishing the other person's humanity, and how do we avoid it becoming tokenism? And how do we fall into these different cracks? So these are still ongoing conversations, but what we have been encouraging them is looking at different ways of how do you get the message out. So if you know there's certain collectives that are close around St. Werburghs City Farm, but do not feel welcome, are you finding ways to get to those notice boards? Are you employing or asking people from those communities, inviting them in to ask to translate some of the documentation? What is the barrier to that? And looking at all these different ways that we can at least start the conversation. And to bless their hearts, they are very keen and very excited, and they want to push forward on transforming and interacting and changing dynamics on the farm. I'm the one always encouraging, I'm the one saying, just take your time, don't rush, because we don't want to change the thing so dramatically that it falls flat, because there's so much unhappiness and there's so much discontent and there's so much, as to be patient and to invite people in and to encourage each other to have the difficult conversations. What does white privilege mean within the context if it's only white people in the room to talk to? If it's not something you had to think about because you are the majority in the environment, then it's almost to some degree, to some people, it's a non-starter for anything to contemplate seriously. So it's to find ways where we invite people from the different cultures in, encourage these difficult conversations, and use different mediums and different finding the ambassadors and the people active doing the cultural work and the people active doing the community work in the communities, and finding ways to encourage them to engage, but also to share resources. Because what's happening in Bristol, I'm not sure how many of the people signed up is in Bristol and is on the chat, is that people are now adopting, I'm using this term very loosely, this is not what they'll call it, so don't quote me on this, but it's of the people have started to adopt a form of guerrilla urban farming, where people from different cultures who have not had access to different environments like St. Werburghs City Farm have started getting seeds, have started getting propagated plants, have started to identify green spaces that's been neglected, have stepped in and have just started planting plants and trees and just starting taking over these spaces and planting because of the limitation of access to green spaces that has been experienced. And the poem that I read of this Somali woman called Sudi, like they started a similar process called Dove Garden, and Dove Garden is based in Kingstown, which is, if you know Bristol, Stokescroft area, it's the high rises just off Stokescroft, and they've started gardening, and what they've done is there was a neglected piece of land that was used for different social ills. What's the term? Where people go where they go and they smoke something, or they, defecate, do funny things in this because it's a piece of neglected land. They went in, they cleaned it out, they cleared out all the mess, they cleared out everything from this piece of neglected land, under the fear and threat that actually the owners might, penalize them or might build on that piece of land whilst they're still tending to it. And despite all this, the challenges and the fears, they've just gone in, they've cleaned it, they've turned it into a beautiful community garden, and now it's had a knock-on effect. So these are the different types of initiatives that people are exploring now in Bristol, and people are taking it serious, looking at ways to equip themselves to become more aware of how to regenerate plots of land that's been neglected, how to restore soil, and people are looking at different ways to propagate and to plant trees and food. Especially, people are now looking. If you just, I could give some context if people are interested, because I've been instructed I can give. For instance, if you put Dove Gardens in on Facebook or Instagram, you can see them, and then through that link, you can look at all these different initiatives happening. I'm just checking. How much time do I have so that I can bring it to a Hillary, so that I just don't go
just
on.
Unmuting. Yes, you're fine to go on for a little bit longer. That's absolutely fine. Yeah.
So there are these different initiatives that the community is looking at doing, and we can do more. We can do with more support, because if you don't know, you don't know. If you are in a more privileged position and you're looking at what to do with your resources, find these little communities. Like one of the things I'm doing now, I'm organizing a festival called the Altered Fest. If anyone wants to come check it out, it starts on Friday. And my intention with this is I wanted, out of different forms of frustration, I wanted to start encouraging and creating environments where we can have artists, people in the community, and organizations that work in well-being and being well in Bristol, to start creating initiatives where we can start knowing what each other is doing. And I've got a few organizations that's participating in this festival that works in culture, that works in well-being, that's working on helping people out of fuel poverty, that's and artists together, creating an environment where the main purpose for why I'm doing it is to encourage cultural cohesion, is to encourage that we need to start figuring out and finding out who is doing what, because one of the things that are undermining our potential for cultural cohesion in Bristol is everybody is just focusing on survival, and everybody's in their own corner doing their own little thing, not really knowing what other organizations are doing, because we have been trying to survive. So what I'm wanting to do, and I will hope this festival is just the first of many. Taliesin is going to be part of it. So, yeah, Hillary is performing, you must come support him. So, is to encourage these type of initiatives where we can find ways in different sectors of our society to come together and to start finding out what we are all doing, and to find ways where we can start supporting each other, because that's the only way. What Brexit is going to eventually do to us is we're going to be cut adrift. And then instead of us being further and further driven further apart, it creates a unique opportunity where we can actually look at the rich cultural diversity that Bristol and the Southwest has in this moment in time, and look at encouraging and working together. Because if we can encourage each other to be the best, to belong, to share our skills, I mean, what could stop us? We could truly, I mean, that's what I love to do as a cultural cohesion consultant, and that's why I interact with organizations like St. Werburghs City Farm, because I'm looking for hope. I don't have no answers, to tell you the truth. The only way we're going to find answers is if we talk to each other and we have the courage to have difficult conversations that goes beyond the privileges that we have right now to just look after ourselves, just look away, just look up, you know. We have to find the courage, because we are facing not only a climate crisis, we're facing all sorts of crises. And the climate crisis will be our undoing. But even before that undoes us, there'll be others, economic, there'll be, you are all have living experience of what I'm trying to say. And all I'm trying to encourage us is to find ways to become more culturally cohesive. That's our only hope in our culture. And we have the notion of one love, in liefde, one love. And one love, all it means is you don't have to love everyone, but you can respect and find ways to acknowledge each other's strength and encouraging it and sharing some of the privilege you have, and not just hogging it and all to yourself. So on that note, thank you very much for allowing me to be part of this platform. Yeah, and let's talk. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer. If anyone has resources, send it my way. Thank you very much, Hillary. Thank you very much, Andy.
That was lovely. Some wonderful points there. I'm sure we can all resonate with with what's being discussed. Has anyone got any questions they'd like to ask either of our wonderful speakers? I noticed that Andy's asked you, Molly, if you have examples of groups that have become more diverse and inclusive, and how they've achieved it and what the impact has been.
It's a really good question. I don't think I've got a very good answer, especially. So thank you for that challenging question. I think I need to do some research. So the Conservation Volunteers, which are a charity people might be familiar with, I had a look at their strategy from 2021 to 2025, and they've got kind of 3 key goals, and one of them is we will support more diverse audiences to connect with green spaces. So I would, I'll post that strategy there, but I think I might go away and do a bit more research and see if there's an organisation that have kind of gone on that journey and reflected. And I don't know how many. I think it'd be maybe a better thing if organisations are a bit more open and talking about, you know, travelling on that journey, definitely. But yeah, I don't have a very good answer, but thanks so much for that question. It's a really great question.
It is, yeah. And Daisy's asked what the name of your festival is again, Kabbo. Could you put a link to it by any chance? If you got an Eventbrite page for it. Oh, you have to unmute, my lovely.
I'll put the link in. So the festival is called the Altered Festival, and it's at a venue called Keep Arted Gallery, which is based in the galleries, and it's an Altered Fest, and it's gonna there's a special section in it called Artivists in a Straw Box, where we have different artists and artivists, where we've built a box where we put them in the box and they share the creative experience with the audience. The public can interact with the artists, and then it's a 10-day festival. On 4 days of it, we're gonna have a collective called Interculture. We're gonna have Bristol Energy Network. We're gonna have Art Space, Life Space, and we're gonna have Bridging Histories, so all these organizations are working in Bristol on different aspects of culture, of energy, etc., etc. So I'll put a link in, and then if anyone wants to come on Friday, we have the festival opens at 3 p.m. and we have our launch at 7 p.m. All support is welcome. Thank you. I'll put a link.
Thank you. Adam, would you like to ask a question?
Yep. Hi. Great. Yep. Wonderful to listen to you both, and certainly something that we haven't heard before in the Community Tree Network. So it is great to hear these different perspectives. I think where we are at More Trees, one of our challenges is we're in South Hams, we're in Devon. There isn't a great deal of overt multiculturalism, so you don't see many people from different cultural backgrounds, but those individuals are very definitely there, so it's quite hidden. And what I'm interested in is if you have experience of how to access those groups, those communities, those individuals, and invite them to join us and get involved in our activities, how to go about that, because I'm not very aware, and talking with my staff and volunteers, we're not very aware of how to reach out to those groups in a way that would make them feel comfortable to engage with us. Oh, the lights have just been switched on. Sorry about that. I'll just mute myself now, but if someone can give me some feedback on that, that'd be great.
I'm sorry to sort of jump in, but my situation is maybe similar, so maybe you could answer a similar thing for me at the same time. I'm living in a very small village in Wales. We're not even in North Wales, we're sort of somewhere on the border, so it's like a bit of a weird spot. So we do all of our literature in Welsh and English. I'm obviously English, but I've lived around this area for quite a long time. And again, I'd like to think that we invite people from all different cultures, and we have, got some people that come that are from have different backgrounds and different sexual orientations and that sort of thing, because I know them. But yeah, there's sort of, I don't know, there's probably other parts of the community I'd like to be able to reach out to. And again, similar to Adam, I don't, we're sort of struggling to do that, I would say.
Kabbo, I don't know if you want to speak, or I've got a couple of ideas and then you can interrupt me.
No, I'm happy for you to go, Molly, and then I can add to what you're sharing.
I think it's always it can obviously be a challenge, and one of the things about the great strength of this kind of more informal, I don't know, maybe that wouldn't describe what you're making, but I'm making the assumption that a lot of the way these groups operate is kind of informal, is that's a really great strength that can feel really friendly, but also sometimes people don't quite know how to get involved. I think that firstly, in terms of reaching out to groups, obviously there's research, there's contacting other organisations that work with places. So for example, local education kind of places, so like local colleges, that kind of thing, local universities, local kind of social services like social prescribing schemes, other charities, and thinking about how someone who's never encountered your group before might want to engage. And sometimes that may not work for you because of the nature of the group. You may not have the capacity to do alternative things, but that could be coming and doing a talk or a presentation or a really hands-on activity to a group of ESOL learners. It could be going along to a local community fair, going along to a place of worship, having sort of thinking about the benefits and the reasons why someone might want to volunteer. There are a range of things. So for example, if you're someone who's newly arrived to an area, talking about making friends, rather than necessarily just having one message. So one of the things I do when I talk about writing role descriptions and talking about your volunteering is I've got 2 different posters from Oxfam, and one of them is both volunteering in a charity shop, and one of them is a young person with some books saying confidence boost, and it's all about this little quote from this person talking about how it's boosted their confidence, and then there's an older lady talking about how she's part of the community. And obviously those are slightly stereotypical images, but it's a really great thing to think about the different reasons that somebody might want to get involved in your group, and particularly if there's somebody who maybe their first thought isn't environmental action, maybe it's meeting new people, maybe it's getting fit and connecting, and also thinking about barriers. So can obviously you have it in English and Welsh, is it really obvious what's involved, are the steps really clearly laid out? So if you're someone who's going there whose English isn't very strong or feels kind of slightly kind of shy or uncomfortable about it, but yeah, I think those are a few different ideas. And I think sort of going to where people are, where that's possible, is also really great. And also getting kind of quotes and stories from people who take part. So rather than saying, we're really inclusive and friendly, if you can get someone to say, I was very nervous and then everyone was really nice, or something like that, that kind of is a much stronger pull for people to get involved with volunteering.
So from what I'm hearing, where because we're a small charity, a lot of our stuff is through social media. But it sounds from what you're saying, we actually need to be very proactive and actually be searching out these groups and then directly contacting them, rather than perhaps just putting our message out there and expecting them to contact us.
I think that's always, I know whenever I say this to groups, they're like, oh great, I'll add something to my list because I don't have a lot on. And it's fair enough. But I think there is a real value in meeting people face to face. That doesn't mean that social media definitely doesn't have a place. But again, one of the things about social media is it's like where you are in the group. So is it that there's a local Facebook group that people are part of that's just about the local neighborhood, or a school's WhatsApp group? That's something that's really valuable, rather than necessarily on more formal methods of communication. So if you say to all of your current volunteers or staff, if you are part of a WhatsApp group, please share this message, rather than thinking in the, not in addition to your kind of Instagram, Facebook, Twitter that have that more formal message, and also thinking about the messages you're sharing. And yeah, again, like, are we thinking about how sometimes a more formal kind of approach can actually be a little bit off-putting as well, if that makes sense, something that feels really sort of corporate and shiny, and a bit more of that personal connection on social media. But yeah, also going out and being in places and seeing how, maybe having like a fun activity and then you can engage people in conversation, that kind of thing is really valuable.
Yeah, I'll support everything Molly's saying, but then at your collectives, what the first question you need to honestly ask in your collective when you gather again, if you have that capacity to do it, is to ask, how uncomfortable are you prepared to get? Yeah, and that doesn't mean it needs to be an unpleasant experience. It just means you must find a way to potentially reach out and move beyond your potentially own awkwardness of wanting to come off wrong, or wanting to not offend anyone, or wanting to not contribute to tokenism. And then within your group, like, we all come together in groups and each one have their own strengths. So this is not just to pile it also on one particular person and say, oh, you're the most chatty, you should do it, but it's to find within who would be up for actually initially, and they not they should not be expected to do it only them. Initially, find a way to approach people from different cultural backgrounds, you know, whether with that and the, I mean, social media is a very good platform to try and suss out who's in your community, what groups are there in the community, and finding ways to try and connect to them. But a lot of people are also not on social media, so you actually have to physically go, you know, and to a place, and just to find a little bit of courage. All it takes is a little bit of courage, yeah, and a little bit of patience, and then actually go and approach these places. But try and just be yourself to a degree. Hopefully you are a kind person. and just ask people if they'd be interested just to give you a hearing and to potentially participate or to become, because you want to also grow. If you encourage them that you're going to welcome their voice in because you want to grow as a collective, you want to grow as people, you want to, you know, you want to do something that can add meaning to all of your lives. People resonate with that because we all human beings, we have basic needs. Like we all want to, we don't want to feel isolated. We don't want to feel, you know, estranged in the society. We want our children to be safe. We want our children to be connected. We want to be safe. We want to find a way to not, you know, and it's going to take a bit of applying your imagination and not to overthink, because overthinking is your enemy. Is to apply your imagination, to find within the group who will initially lead on it, and to risk getting uncomfortable and to follow some of these steps that Molly has said. It might not always work if you, and each different environment. I mean, England's different to Wales. I mean, that's obvious. We all know this. And to find your own way of how you can find places where people potentially that you would like to involve, that's part of your community, but not quite part for different reasons. And just reach out to them and ask your children if they would invite their friends in school to ask their mom, or maybe give them a little flyer. Find someone in the community that can translate it. You know, maybe if you know your child, there's, you know, the cultural collective of who's in your child's class, find someone that can translate it in a language that they can understand and give it to the child potentially, or wait for the parent when they come and give them, you know, just risk a little courage, risk being a little uncomfortable, and just reach out to people, you know. Because schools are always a good idea, but then there's also community centers, there's also the shop, there's also the local supermarket, you know. Even if you don't have someone in the community that translates, look on Fiverr or something like that. There's something, and ask someone to translate something for you into a different language. That if you can, you know, if you can afford all those different steps. Of course, there's also a cost to everything.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, the key thing there is, you know, how uncomfortable are you willing to get? I like that as a question.
Yes.
Starting point, isn't it? You know, it's like, where are we going with this, and are we prepared to move out of our comfort zone? Yeah. Andy, you've got a question?
I just wanted to contribute my sort of experiences and build on what Molly and Kabbo have said, and well, just to echo what they've said really. And I think it's really important to start with your values as an organization, and that you kind of see yourselves as a resource for the whole community, and that's the basis on which you're going to have those conversations with people in the community that you haven't reached yet, that you want to openly and open-heartedly reach out to them wherever they are, whether it's in schools, community centres, places of worship, and have those conversations. And sometimes you could try and do it informally. Sometimes maybe you could even have some kind of survey or a stall or some kind of presence where you can communicate to people and explain, you know, what your community tree nursery is all about, and ask people how they might be interested or how it could become accessible to them. So it may mean that you have to create something slightly different. You maybe have to create a space within, you know, your volunteer opportunities that's welcoming to specific groups, whether it's based on gender. I mean, I can remember when I was working in a housing estate in Edinburgh and trying to reach out to Black and minority ethnic communities that's suffering to a lot of racial harassment. The thing that worked for us to start off was to create a family day for Black and minority ethnic communities, where people would come as families and feel safe within a particular environment, because everything up until that point within community services was done on a kind of everyone's welcome basis, but then only certain people would come. But if you created a special space for people, then they will come. So maybe it's kind of thinking differently, to create something that welcomes people in and introduces people to your space, to your community tree nursery. And I think particularly now, I mean, you know, historically, the environmental conservation space has been incredibly kind of like monocultural. It's incredibly white, and it still is, particularly environmental NGOs, and I work for one. And yeah, it's a real issue, but I think things are changing, particularly within the youth climate movement. So I would see that as a place to have conversations with in schools. And there may be particular areas, things like Duke of Edinburgh, for example, does like volunteering. So it may be that that's a way to reach particular communities that you might not ordinarily contact with. So I'm sure there are lots of ways, but I think, like Adam said, you really have to be proactive and be willing to do things, to be willing to be open to doing things differently as well. And then, it's about a kind of process of transformation. So you've got to be willing to change. I think Cabo invokes this, in terms of staffing, governance. You've got to be willing to change all of those things to kind of become that sort of culturally cohesive community organisation.
Yeah, that's very true. Thank you. Patricia, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. I basically wanted to speak to Andy from More Trees, first of all. And then as you were speaking, Andy Egan, I thought, oh, actually, you're speaking to my experience. So is Andy Owen able to just
Adam, I think it is.
Is it? Oh, Adam, sorry,
yeah.
Adam Owen from More Trees. I just wanted to say, I've just moved to South Hams. I've actually went to an event where a couple of your staff, or a couple of your staff from and other people engaged with your organisation, went to an event specifically to go and meet your organisation, because I'm someone that your sort of Andy Egan talked about. So I'm 55, but since I was 17, I was into the environment and conservation, but I didn't have access to getting involved with various schemes, etc., because it was all that you had to bring. You had to raise a lot of money to be able to go on certain schemes, etc. So I did some BTCV volunteering, and I just used to talk to people about nature and the environment. And there's a lot that's gone on in between, but I've moved myself to Devon from London about 6 months ago, because I want to be immersed in nature, and I've just done a nature connection guide training, and given up my job a year ago, and I'm just finding my way down here. And I've already made links with different people, and I'm coming from a community background, so I could what's being discussed on here today
isn't a subject that I've got, is something that I can help you with. Basically, I've got ideas on how you can, you know, reach out, and the things that are being shared, the ideas that are being shared are resonant with how I think and what I was suggesting to your other people on the stall at a Christmas fair. But generally, yeah, basically that's what I wanted to say. I just wanted to say that I am someone that's always been in these spaces sort of on my own, and I even wanted to take a group of inner city kids to Machantlev and actually sort of planned a project when I was in my early 20s, but you know, I just didn't have the support around me to be able to put it into action. So I'm glad that these conversations are happening now. I'm glad that, you know, it's something of, you know, of interest to people. And I'm happy to help you with, you know, more trees, because I'm literally on the doorstep. My friends live in South Brent. I'm backwards and forwards there all the time. I'm based in Totnes. But yeah, I'm interested in, you know, linking. And I love your idea of the festival, Kabbo, and I know Bristol as well. And I'm actually involved in a social prescribing project and forest bathing people, etc. So I'm coming from the wellness place. So I resonate with, you know, what's being said here. And I'm very much interested in bringing people together. Culturally cohesive consultant is a great job title or a great you know, occupation. So yeah, love everything that's being said. Would love to keep in touch with you, Kabbo, to sort of, you know, learn from you and what you're doing in terms of being able to help do that here in Devon. Coming from a background where I've worked in collectives to put on environmental events. So yeah, I think I might even have your email and just not got round to emailing you, Adam. So I can do that after saying hello.
Well, definitely hello. Great to see you. I don't know, was it at the Rattery Christmas Fair?
Yes,
that you
yeah.
Grand. So you'll have met some of us, most definitely.
Yeah.
Yep, come along and get in touch. If you've got my email, then that's definitely the first point of call, or give us a call and I'll pick up the phone. Yeah, and let's see what we can do, see how we can collaborate. It'd be fantastic. Most definitely. And for us, volunteering is the life and blood of our organization at the end of the day. So to engage with people like yourself who can then help us to engage with other individuals or certain community groups is brilliant, because as you appreciate, for many of the community tree nurseries, it's down to a handful of people, some of those volunteers, some of those paid, and all the support, you know, and the wider that network can be locally is brilliant. So definitely, please do get in touch.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm happy to support anyone. Hillary has got all the contact details, so she could just, if anyone wants to get in contact, you can definitely get it through the networks that you have come to this talk.
Yes, I'll share your contact details in a follow-up email after the event, and you know, with the link to the YouTube recording, etc. So yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Patricia, for that. That's wonderful small world kind of connection going on there. Jess, would you like to ask your question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi there. Hi. It was actually just to follow on from what Patricia was saying. We're Emmaus Cornwall, a homeless charity, was setting up a community tree nursery, and I just thought that the questions that everyone's just been asking about how to link into these different groups, this is something that I'm working on this week and last week, and I'm literally at that stage now. And the one thing I found absolutely the best way forward for this, just from my experience, it may be different in other counties, but in Cornwall, the social prescribing link worker that is in my local area in St Austell, and all of the link workers that are funded from the NHS and other places, are just an incredible network. They are, just in case anybody doesn't know, as I didn't really know that much about social prescribing, but very quickly, it's basically based on the fact that 1 in 5 of every GP appointments is actually non-medically related. And when the NHS realised this, they decided to think, well, if people are coming in for non-medically related situations, then it needs a non-medical solution. So people are going there because of social exclusion, homelessness, or stresses or mental health problems, whatever it may be. And the link worker that the NHS is funding, or it has funding from other places as well, is actually pointing those individuals. So the GP will point them to the link worker, and the link worker will point them to, after asking them a series of questions, what did they used to enjoy? Was it sports? Was it gardening? Was it nature? And then if there are any nature groups within that community, they'll point them off to that group. So they're doing things that they actually love. And the reports that have come back over the last few years, it's only been going a few years, and the actual results have come back with astonishing positive results. So people are sort of really heralding this as a great, finally, this linking up of medical health, social working and voluntary groups that's been lacking all these years. And it's having huge benefits. So, and I'm only talking from my personal experience, but it's propelled me forward with our project, because, you know, we're a homeless charity, but we don't necessarily only want to work with we want to work with homeless people at risk of homelessness, and many other vulnerable groups, and want to have that sort of diverse approach to volunteering and volunteering and open up to the community at large as well. So I'm trying to make sure that we are very inclusive, and I'm finding that working through that network of social prescribers and link workers. So, for example, the 7 in Cornwall, and they're not generally based within the GP, because what they've found is that actually when you put a link worker within the community hubs, they're much more effective. So
oh, you've gone on mute, Jess.
sorry, is that better?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's basically, there's something called the National Academy of Social Prescribing, and they all have regional people. And I got in touch with my regional person. He gave me loads of information about the 7 different link workers, and I'm making my way through them. But the first one I spoke to in the area that I'm working in has been incredibly helpful. And it's just something to just advise if people are trying to get out to work with different groups in your community, you don't know how to do it. I would say that's a definite first place that I found really helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. Molly, did you want to add something to that?
No, just that I should have mentioned social prescribers, but I didn't. But that's what I was thinking of trying to say, but I couldn't remember quite that. But yeah, they're a really great place to engage with, as well as obviously your local volunteer centre will, yeah.
So social prescribers are employed in GP practices, is that correct?
Yeah, they'll work with the, they'll work with a GP practice or a local health, kind of depending on the structure, but they'll definitely, yeah, so sometimes they're based in the community, but they're funded by the NHS generally.
Fantastic. Taliesin, you got a question?
This is more of an insight, and it might seem obvious at first. However, so Molly, I understand that the company you work for does volunteering, and does it provide volunteering opportunities as well? Yeah. What's the capacity for you promoting like smaller companies or organizations, so such as the Fellowship of the Trees, for work experience, or maybe in Kabbo's case, work on the farm or things like that? How does that process work?
So I work for Groundwork London, which is an incredibly big charity that does all sorts of different things. And Groundwork has different regional, so there is Groundwork South, and then there are different kind of regional hubs. And so we do have our own volunteering projects, and then also we run the volunteer centre in different boroughs. So we've got one in Kingston, one in Waltham Forest, one in Barnet, which means we're the organisation in the London Borough of Waltham Forest. Anyone who wants to volunteer there, and any organisation, no matter how small or big, should come to us and we can support them finding volunteers. Obviously, that's only in Waltham Forest or the boroughs we operate in. So I would always recommend talking to your local volunteer centre, but the local volunteer centre should support the range of organisations. I know that in Wales there's Volunteering Wales, and I think it works a little bit differently, but similarly there's a website, and then hopefully there's a member of staff. It's not always the case, unfortunately. Not every area has a volunteer centre, but a lot do, and that's someone who should be able to provide advice and support and a platform to promote roles on volunteering opportunities. So I couldn't necessarily help. I can't help for something that's not in the London Borough of Waltham Forest, but if anyone wants to email me, they definitely can, and I can give them, just have a brief chat with them and have a look in their local area and research where would be a good place to approach. I'd also say that if you're a group and there isn't an obvious volunteer centre, universities, if there's a local university, they'll almost always have a volunteering programme. They may not have as much volunteering development, but they will have that connection. The other thing is, social prescribers. And if there's something where you want to connect in with a group, talking to that, thinking about, having those discussions about what kind of skills what kind of connections you want to make, and how you want to get different people involved in your volunteering is something. Actually, I think a lot of places are often crying out for volunteering opportunities for the people that they support. So I think you'll almost always be welcomed if you say, do any of the young people you support or any of the people learning English or etc. Want to come along for a day of volunteering.
Brilliant, thank you.
And also, Molly, am I right in thinking there's a national database of volunteering opportunities? Is it doit.org?
Yeah, definitely. So there's doit.org. There's often there'll be a regional kind of one as well. So there are lots of different ways that you can kind of get people involved in volunteering. I know volunteer in Wales, it's like there's one big volunteering website, and I'm not sure about if there's anyone from Scotland or Northern Ireland here, but doit is a great one nationally.
Thanks. So has anyone got any other insights or questions they'd like to share before we just sort of got another 5 minutes or so before we finish? So I'd just like to say thank you so much to both of our wonderful speakers, Molly and Kabbo. Thank you so much you've given us a lot of food for thought. And, thank you everyone for being here this evening as well. As I said earlier, I'll be emailing out various contact details, links to the video, and also to our future training sessions and open space sessions as well. So do follow us on social media, do keep in touch, do share your uncomfortable developments. And did either of you want to say anything else before we go?
Just thank you so much for the opportunity to speak and all the interesting discussions, and thank you, Kabbo, for sharing such an interesting perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, bless. Same for you, Molly. And thank you for everyone for allowing us and inviting us in. And come to my festival. I've sent the links in the chat. It'll be good to see all of you who I'm unable to see because you're not putting your pictures up. But yeah, thank you for having us. Hilary, Andy, Taliesin, yeah, and everyone else part of the collective. And have a good night.
Yeah, and good luck with the festival. I hope it is what it needs to be, and having those conversations is wonderful. Joining up those dots, yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, the intention is to take it around the country. So yes, that's part of that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I feel like sometimes a bit isolated here in Deepest Dark as well, so it's been really nice to connect with city folk. So yeah, cheers for running it. It's really nice.
Bless.
You're welcome. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Good evening.
Good night.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.